Okay, welcome back. And thank you once again for joining us at Google for Mobile. My name is Monisha. I work on a team which is called Web Partnerships, and I look after partnerships for Asia. And today I'll just be taking you through the talks this afternoon. So first up, we have a fascinating talk by Jake Archibald and Mariko Kosaka. Her Twitter handle is slightly different, so I always get confused. So Jake and Mariko will be talking to you about building for web and making it fast even on 2G, which I'm sure is of interest to any of you looking to enter Tier 2 or Tier 3 cities and capture the minds and hearts of users on low-end phones. Jake and Mariko came out to India earlier this year and went back and built a game called Prox, which is their version of Minesweeper. But they will be talking to you about the techniques that they use to make the game load fast and run smoothly even on feature phones. So without much ado, Jake and Mariko.
Right. Let's see if it works.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Okay. So the slippers are over there. I'm just in my socks for now.
Yeah.
So,
It's his uniform.
My clicker's disconnected. That's a good sign.
Oh, okay.
I can pick it up from now, actually. So earlier this year, a few of us went on a fact-finding mission to India to see how folks here use the internet. And one thing stood out to us, and that is that feature phones are back.
Yep, the feature phone market doubled in 2018 in India, and the sale of the smartphone flattened. At current rates, 400 million feature phones will be sold in India this year.
Yes, and whoever's controlling the speaker, if you could make the music stop coming out of it, because I feel like I'm on a really weird music video right now. Thank you, that's good. Okay, so these phones, they're pretty different from smartphones, right?
Yep. The Geo phone, for instance, is 240 pixel wide display, single density, no touch screen. The processor is awful, but they're relatively cheap, right? We all know that Geo phone is very cheap, and it's getting millions of people online for the first time who couldn't afford it before.
Yes, also the Geo phone is a web-based phone. It's running KaiOS, which is a fork of Firefox OS. So it's running, well, Firefox 48. We've seen some running 42, 48. It kind of depends
like 39,
on how
yeah, but the newest, I think KaiOS 2.5 is running Firefox 48. And a lot of companies in India here produced a web apps for these phones, such as Z5, but we wanted to see by ourselves how far we could push these tiny devices.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can get my clicker working again. Here we go. Oh, no. Well, do you know what? That's good redundancy that we have two clickers, because you can take over. So yes, a little team of us got together consisting of Mariko.
Yep, and Jake, and
Sama.
He's in England.
He's in England. England's that way. I think we worked it out.
Probably. Maybe that way. I don't know.
If you go far enough. I think you could go both ways. But it's shorter that way.
So we wanted to see if we build an interactive web experience that would run on devices like this, but with responsive design and progressive enhancement, scale up to something that looked great on desktop.
Right, I think I'm going now. So that thing became Prox. Did you press that or did I press that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, fair enough. You can continue doing that. So Prox is a game, and if you like Minesweeper, you'll like Prox because it's the same.
Yeah, so here it is on the desktop. How many of you have seen Prox before? Oh, great. Hi, users. Great. So we've shown a lot of animation and stuff at it, but it's scaled down nicely and display and playable on feature phone using same code base. We only have one code base.
Yeah, we put in a lot of effort to make it fast, so we figured we'd go through the tricks and techniques that we used, because none of this is really unique to games, none of it's really unique to this particular app. It's stuff that you can do on any web app or website.
Yep, but before we dive in, let's tackle the question that crops up on the Twitter a lot.
Yes. Should I care about performance?
Should I care about performance?
Should I care about performance? We think yes. We think that's the right answer. Yeah. Our go-to article for this is this one on Web Fundamentals. You can find it at this bit.ly link here. It points to web performance studies carried out by a variety of companies.
Yep. So such as Pinterest, who reduced the perceived wait time by 40% and saw 15% increase in signups.
Yes, or Cook, who reduced their load time by 850 milliseconds and saw an increased conversions in session time.
Or the BBC, who lost additional 10% of users every additional second the page took to load.
Or Auto Anything, who reduced their page load time by half and saw a 12% boost in sales.
Or DoubleClick, who found publishers with the sites was loaded with 5 seconds aimed at bad
You nailed that in rehearsal.
Yes.
That was close. That was close. Of course, terms and conditions apply. Although that's a large variety of sites, we've seen folks that say it doesn't apply to them because their site is somehow different.
Yeah, their site doesn't exactly match what we see on the case studies. Therefore, they don't think it's evident that it doesn't apply to them.
Yes.
We don't buy that.
No, I think everyone in this room is a user of software, right? And we all know how frustrating it is when something performs badly, and load time is a huge part of that.
Right. So the performance optimization we're going to look at today are pretty simple.
Dead easy.
Literally 2 minutes.
On paper. But when you've got a build system wrapped around your project, sometimes adding an extra tag can be a real pain. So we're going to look at that side of things as well.
Yep. Let's rewind the first version, the alpha version of Prox, before we done any optimization.
Yes, it's totally the original alpha version, not just one we've invented for this talk. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're ruining the illusion. Aside from being a bit slow, it wasn't all that different from your average JavaScript-driven applications.
No, so our HTML file, it looked a bit like this. This might be familiar to you in a few projects. It's pretty basic, just a bit of metadata. The JavaScript include there, that takes care of populating the page. We've got a style sheet there, but that is just for a web font. The rest of our CSS is embedded in our JavaScript via PostCSS.
Mm-hmm. So the notable difference from the most web apps is that we use Preact instead of React. So React is 33 kilobyte in total. Preact is 3 kilobyte. We didn't need any of the additional features that React provides, so it was no-brainer that we use Preact. 30K kilobytes saved for free.
Yes, the other difference is that we used Rollup. Basically, we wanted to give Rollup a try, but we've used Rollup for libraries before, but not for full web apps.
Yeah, so we see last year, we built another web app called Scoosh. And to build Scoosh, we used Webpack. And we say it's really just our colleague Jason handle the Webpack side of things.
Yeah, Jason's in America. We think America's that way as
well?
well?
Yeah, I mean, England is that way. If you
and
go
you just
over
keep
England,
going,
yeah.
And that's America, okay.
Yeah. He had to make use of a lot of undocumented Webpack internals just to do basic stuff. He has years of Webpack experience and no inside out, but we don't.
Yeah, so as a result, we didn't really understand the project's build system, and if anything went wrong, we were kind of just waiting for Jason to wake up so he could help us with it.
Yeah, and talking to other teams, we hear same stories, like maybe 1 or 2 Webpack whisperers set up all of the build system, and no one else really understand how it's made. And maybe this sounds familiar to you.
Yes. So when I use Webpack, I don't feel like I'm using JavaScript. I feel like I'm flipping switches in like a massive config objects and like herding lots of plugins of varying quality that often don't really play well together.
Yeah. So we thought we'd give Rollup a shot. We found lots of plugins that are varying quality that often don't play well together.
But, and this is the key difference, mere mortals like you and me can write our own plugins. Like Rollup has a simple, well-documented plugin system. It's really easy to get involved in the innards of the build. Like seriously, if you know enough JavaScript to wrangle a Webpack config, you know more than enough to write a Rollup plugin.
Yep. Also, because we knew we were going to have a tough time using, the application runs a lot of animation and things, so we knew that it's going to be tough time running everything on a single thread for these feature phones. So workers, the web workers, were a core part of our architecture from the very start.
Yeah, we use a little library called comlink to facilitate communication between the main thread and the various workers that we used. So that library is needed in both places. Well, it's needed on the main thread and it's needed in every worker as well. This is a little library that Surma built. It makes it really easy to communicate with workers. Unfortunately, Webpack cannot share chunks between workers and the main thread, so the user would end up downloading the comlink code, well, at least twice, once for the main thread and then once for every worker.
Yep, and this could happen on each shared dependency, not just comlink. So Rollup handled this out of the box, leaving choice of the format for developers like us.
But it wasn't just JavaScript that we needed to handle. We needed HTML as well.
Yeah, so there's a Webpack plugin to help create HTML for your project. But here's a code for that plugin. It's massive. It relies on a lot of undocumented parts of the Webpack.
Yes, this plugin is so big that it actually has its own plugin ecosystem. It doesn't really want you touching the HTML itself. Instead, you have to learn its configuration objects and all of their quirks. Your skills in HTML are not really useful here.
Yeah, we couldn't find a good equivalent for rollup, so we decided to write our own. Rollup plugins are functions that return objects. The objects have a name key, just so that rollup can provide better debugging information when something goes wrong. The rest of this object is callback for various stages of the build, and they're all documented.
Yes, so the callback we're going to use is generate bundle. So generate bundle gives you these couple of arguments here. The first one is the options that rollup was called with, the output options. But it also gives you this bundle object, and this bundle object is amazing. So we'll take a look at that. It tells you everything about the build, like all of the bits and pieces for it.
Yeah, so for JavaScript files, you get the code, the initial path, the file name, which has been hashed to make easier to cache, but also loads of data about the dependency of the file has and everything it exports. For non-JavaScript assets, you get less information, but still get access to that data.
Yes, indeed. So now we can create our HTML. So what we're going to do is we're going to load a template. This is just an EJS template we decided to use. We just picked EJS. It's what we wanted to use. Rollup doesn't care what templating language you use, as long as it returns a string. And once we've got the string of the HTML we want to use, we then use this emits file method, and we say this is an asset, here's the file name, and here's the source code for it. And now Rollup will write that file along with everything else.
Right. So here's our template. We've got a placeholder here for the JavaScript URL. We don't know what it is right now because that's Rollup that's going to add the hash to it. We need to pass the URL of the JS after hashing. And we can get this from the bundle object. Since it tells us the both input and output, we've created a little helper here for the get.js. This searches the bundle for the correct entry.
Absolutely. So now all we need to do is add that plugin to our set of Rollup plugins there, and that's it, we're done. Now you know everything you need to know to write a Rollup plugin.
Yep. I realized that this was a lot of words that we just threw at you, but compare it to the Webpack version, we'd argue that the one we wrote was much simpler.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Simpler.
Everybody in your team should be able to understand and adjust it.
Yes, and even better, like we're writing code to do what we want rather than wrangling config. Like if we want our HTML to build slightly differently, if we want those tags in a different order, we just go in and change the code, change the HTML code.
Yep.
But what do we actually need to change?
Yeah, so we needed to find out where Prox was losing performance. Our tool of choice for testing these situations in somewhat real-world situation is our web page test.org. It lets you test on the real devices and with excellent throttling.
Yes, we're going to be testing on a Moto G4. This is a fairly old mid-range phone, but not dissimilar to the kind of devices people are using all around the world. We're also going to test on a 3G connection.
Yep, so 3G is good speed to measure because some of the time you will have 4G, but due to signals or conditions, you'll be experiencing speed more like 3G or worse.
Yes, so here are the results for the very first version of Prox, the one that wasn't optimized. The first thing I tend to look at is the film strip here along the top, because this shows what the user is seeing as the app is downloading.
Yep, so let's break this down. For the first 4.2 seconds, the user sees nothing.
That's what nothing looks like.
Yeah, quite literally nothings.
Yeah, totally thingless.
Yeah, so, but out of the nothing, here comes our first render.
Yep, this is the first render, but we can't really count this as ready until the user sees something more like this with the full UI and interactivity. And the user doesn't actually get that until they have been waiting for a whole 5.1 seconds, so that's not so good.
Yeah, no. But it was, like we said, we're targeting these feature phones. So, and of course, like, internet speed in India, much closer to 2G, right? And then, like, especially in rural areas where these feature phones are popular. So on 2G, the user gets 8.1 seconds of nothing. Then, like a pretty useless render, pretty useless render are almost 11 seconds until they're able to play the game.
Yeah, 11 seconds. Let's put that into context. Usain Bolt can run 100 meters quicker than it takes to load a dumb game over 2G. You know, that's terrible.
Yeah, so the user had to download 64 kilobyte before the site was interactive. Surely we can do better. But how much better? I asked Jake to figure that out.
Yes, so I did a little bit of competitor analysis on this. So this is a graph that shows the size of Windows Minesweeper over time. So it started out as 11K in Windows 3.11, and then it actually got smaller in Windows 95. I think that's actually pretty incredible. So it's only 9.63 kilobytes. That's amazing. That's much smaller than Prox, the piece of shit app we made. But then in Windows 2000, whoop, look what happens there. Jumps up in size, doesn't it? It becomes 7 times bigger, 70K. Now it's bigger than Prox at this point. And the size crept up again in XP as well, up to sort of 80K. But then, bam, it became 50 times bigger. That's 3.84 megabytes in Vista. And it's sort of roughly the same there in Windows 7. But then, bam, it became 25 times bigger still. This is 104 megabytes in Windows 10. That's unbelievable. Minesweeper is actually growing so fast here. To make sense of the graph, we have to switch it to a logarithmic scale.
Yeah, so if you wake up at night worrying about how much your CSS file is growing in size, this is way worse.
Yeah, we've actually been analyzing this trend and seeing where it might go in the future, and we predict by 2025 Minesweeper will be 2 terabytes in size. By 2030, 2/3 of the planet's surface will be covered by a single hard drive containing 1 copy of Windows Minesweeper.
Yes, so Greta and activists are doing great towards spreading awareness of climate change, but surely the biggest threat to the mankind is Windows Minesweeper.
Yes, absolutely. So in conclusion, Prox 62K, we're not doing that bad, really.
Yeah, thanks,
so
Jake.
Thank you and good night.
Yep, truly great report.
Thank you.
We know Minesweeper can be done in 10 kilobyte, right? The Minesweeper started in 10 kilobyte. Our version has a little more going on, like graphically, we have animation, but still, it's 62 kilobyte to interactive. We should probably reduce that.
Yes, we probably should. So if you want to improve the performance of your site, but you only have a few minutes, identify the important resources that start downloading a little bit too late. So looking at the timeline here, we're getting to render at 4.2 seconds. But our JavaScript is fully loaded at this point, so the site is ready to go, but it is useless because there is no text here.
Yeah, because, we're using web fonts. We're using Space Mono from Google Fonts, both the normal version and the bold version. They are both 10 kilobyte each, which isn't all that bad. So why is it, giving us trouble?
Yes, to find that out, we are going to take a deep dive into the network waterfall in web page test, which is very similar to what you'll get in Chrome DevTools as well. And this is the pattern we were seeing. First up, HTML downloads.
Yeah, the center line here is convention both web page test and DevTools uses. It means that it's setting up HTTP connection. And the thicker one here represents that it is a request and response time.
Yes, and once the HTML is downloaded, we then download the CSS and we download the fonts as well. It's worth noticing when you're comparing things like a network waterfall to like rendering on the page, they don't add up perfectly, they don't align perfectly because once the browser has downloaded the fonts, it needs to parse them, it needs to process them, and then it sends it off for painting, and then finally it will appear on the screen. So you might see like a couple of 100 milliseconds delay between those two things happening.
Yeah, but the red flag here is that CSS and the fonts both have these thinner lines, meaning they are setting up connections. This is because the CSS is on another server, fonts.googleapis.com, so it has to start new connection for new domain.
And however, if we look inside the CSS as well, we can see the fonts, they come from yet another server, fonts.gstatic.com, so that's yet another connection.
So a quick fix here is to copy the CSS and the font onto our own server. Then the way it can reuse the existing collection for the index.html, and in theory, that should improve things by a second.
Wait, you can't just do that. Fonts are protected by various intellectual property laws, including trademarks, copyrights, and design patents. Copying them to your server may violate the policy of the rights holder.
But whilst that is maybe true for many font providers, it doesn't apply to Google Fonts. So you're allowed to host them on your CSS and on your servers.
Ooh, disaster averted. I, for one, will be able to sleep at night.
Yes, great. So in fact, the CSS is so small, we may as well just inline it in our HTML.
But what about these fonts, right? The browser tries to be smart when it comes to font downloading. It won't download the fonts until it finds something on the page that actually needs them. And that means it has to wait for the CSS to download, and it has to wait for an element to appear on the page that contains text that needs that font. And this is good in some ways because it means the browser can avoid downloading fonts that it doesn't actually need on the page. But in this case, we know it needs those fonts.
Yes. So the answer here is link rel preload tags in the header of the document. This tells the browser to download that font file, the particular thing that you want to use, and then hold it in memory until it's needed. And with those small changes, we should see this yellow line shrink when we next pass it through the web page test. Well, at least that's the theory anyway.
But we have to get this working with our build tools. So here's the Create HTML plugin that we created earlier. What we're trying to do here is we're going to inline CSS for the fonts and add a preload tag for each of them. I'm not going to go through it step by step because we only have 40 minutes here, but it looks a little like this. Whoop, there it goes.
Yeah.
Just a few extra lines.
Yeah. At the start of the build, we used the rollups emit asset method to bring our fonts into our build. And then this means rollup will handle that file name hashing for us. Then when it comes to generate our HTML in this plugin, we pass that data into our template. So where this helper gives us the final URL for the font.
Exactly. So now we can use this data in our template. So what I'm going to do here is iterate through the font data that we put into the template, and we're going to output a style tag that defines the font, and that's just using the data that we passed in via the plugin. And then what we're going to do is just output a little preload tag for each one, I guess.
Yeah. And then?
Yeah. So there it goes. There's our preload tag. Yeah, there it goes.
Great.
Easy
so
peasy.
What I like about this is that rollup plugin is handling the stuff that's specific to the rollup, like hashing the files, getting their name. For the HTML part, the one that we know, you are writing HTML, not the rollup specific HTML, right? Rollup isn't preventing us from rearranging the tags or adding new tags.
Yes, but we are not done yet. Fonts aren't the only asset that's loading too late. At the same time, we download our script. It also downloads other scripts that it depends on. This is because of the code splitting that we explained earlier between the main thread and the various workers. However, a bit like the fonts, we know that the main page always needs all three of these scripts, so we should preload those as well.
Yeah, but how can we figure out which script to preload, right? Rollup's bundle object gives this answer. Remember, it gives a lot of information to us developers. So for each bit of output.js, it gives us an array of files it directly imports. So we pass this property into our template and back over in our EJS template. And we can loop over those dependencies and output preload tags.
Yep, just like that. So we've moved the fonts onto our own server, and we've added some preload tags to them and to our scripts as well. This is all better in theory, but what does web page test actually tell us about the real world impact?
Yeah, let's look at it. So we've eliminated the no fonts render. As soon as it renders, everything else is ready to go. That's 1 second improvement on 3G and a massive 3 seconds improvement on 2G. So we haven't really impacted the red bar though. That's the part where the users see absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and 4 seconds, that's a lot of nothing. On 2G, it's 8 seconds. That's a lot of nothing. And this is the part of the loading process where the user doesn't even know if the server's responding. They don't know if they're ever going to get an answer from the server.
Right. So looking at web page test network waterfall confirms that we achieved what we set out to do. Everything important is loading in parallel, right? But it's just taking too long.
Yeah, so we have two options here. Like, we could try and just make these bars shorter by reducing the code, or we could just make it matter less.
Yeah. So right now, we are fully reliant on JavaScript for our first render. Let's put a stop to that, and let's do server-side rendering, but like in the build time, so we call it the pre-render or static render.
Yeah, we want the user to see something like this. It isn't interactive at this stage, so we've removed any of the buttons that require JavaScript. But this can appear while the JavaScript's downloading, and it improves the perception of performance because the user sees that something is happening. And then once the JavaScript loads, it can enhance the page just like this.
Yeah. There are a few ways to do this. Every DOM orchestration framework that's worth using have some kind of way to generate HTML from a component. In Preact and React, it's render to string. This is pretty fast. Not as fast as other template languages, but it's fast enough that large-scale sites run it on every request sometimes. Although we were only generating HTML at the build time, so performance isn't something we were too much caring about. However, it runs in Node, and we actually see that as a downside. See, if you have any code that assumes it's running in browser, for example, you may be accessing IndexedDB, it's going to fall down from here. To fix it, you'll have to end up with a lot of code branching. Still, render to string is probably the ideal if your code base can adapt the rest of the code for it to kind of make it nicer, but it's not what we ended up using.
No, we looked at JSDOM, which is like a kind of browser that runs within Node. The problem there is the word kinda. It's like a completely different browser that you have to support. So we tried to use it. This is what we were intending on using. But we found these sort of weird behaviors. One weird behavior, it kept on losing some inline background images we had set on some elements. And we dug into why, and it turns out that JSDOM doesn't understand linear gradients. And as per the web specifications, browsers ignore inline styles that they don't understand, and JSDOM was behaving like a browser, but a browser that doesn't understand linear gradients. Also, for what it's worth, it's slower than render to string, so it isn't something you would often want to be running on every request.
Yeah, so in the end, we went with Puppeteer. Puppeteer launches a headless version of Chrome. So you can load pages, execute JavaScript, and then read that result out of that. Your code is running on the actual Chrome, so it's not like you're supporting new browser. But however, it's slower than render to string. A little slower than JSDOM, but not that by much. We only need to run it once per build, so for us, it wasn't a big deal. It's really easy to install and use, but adding a whole version of Chrome to your build is a pretty big jump in complexity. It's what we ended up with procs, and it wasn't too bad, honestly.
No, it was okay. So how did we actually get it working? Well, we wrote another plugin, didn't we? There it is. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but just wanted to show you that it's a relatively small chunk of code. Puppeteer lets us launch this invisible version of Chrome, run our JavaScript, and then we can collect the HTML that it generates from all the DOM elements. We can just serialize those. Also, since our CSS was in our JavaScript, it created style tags for all of the components that were used in that first render. So we've collected those up as well. I mean, we kind of got CSS inlining for free.
Yeah. So one bit we haven't covered is how do we prevent the pre-render from rendering elements that aren't interactive. What we want is something like this, right?
Yes, absolutely. The simplest solution to achieve this is to give a little bit of code like this to Puppeteer, and that can run before the rest of our script. And that means in our app, we can branch on that, and we can do something different, such as hiding buttons. And since this is only true in Puppeteer, it's not going to run those steps for real users.
Yeah, but it means you're shipping pre-render code to the user, code that they don't need. And it's probably not a lot of code, but it's probably not worth putting the effort into shipping it?
Yeah, we probably actually don't need to worry about this. I think it's fine. It's fine, just a little bit of code.
You're still shipping the extra code. Shall we fix this?
Yeah, go on, let's fix it anyway.
Yeah,
come on.
Good. So our aim is to remove this code from the build that reaches the user, right? This code only needs at the pre-render build process. So here is our current set of plugins. Can you guess what we are going to do now?
I have literally no idea.
Well, we're going to write another plugin.
Yes, another plugin. Brilliant.
The plugin means that we can write a code like this, and the value of pre-render here. So will be whatever we pass into, right, the pre-render, and our build script.
Yes, a plugin like this, I use this on a lot of projects now. It's really good for lots of kind of constants, like version numbers, flags, booleans like this. I've seen similar plugins that don't require the import statement like we've used here. They just change some JavaScript value throughout your code. And I kind of hate that. I don't like that because it's not obvious to the reader of the code that some build magic is going to happen there. Whereas here, I see this, and I see this is a special import. This is some kind of magic import. It's not a valid URL. So something special is happening in the build system. I can search for that code, and I will find the Rollup plugin that's actually handling it. And also, Rollup is actually really smart here. So if we do a build where preload is true, what Rollup will do is it will actually optimize this bit away, so it is just the block there. But more interestingly, if we do a build where it's false, it will optimize this to this.
Yep, that's what we did. We created 2 builds, one for users and one for Puppeteer. So let's take a look. This is the entire plugin. The plugin only does something when the import starts with const. And if it finds such an import, it generates a code containing the default export on the fly. That's it. That's all.
Yes, I use this plugin everywhere. OK, so here's the comparable Webpack plugin to do the same thing. If you want to benefit from the dead code elimination side of things as well. Again, this is not something that I would feel comfortable hacking around in. Now, you might feel that we are giving Webpack a bit of a beating here. And it's because we kind of are, but the honest truth is that the difference between working on a project with Webpack and working on a project with Rollup has been night and day for us. With Rollup, not only did we feel that we understood what was happening, but we felt capable of changing what was happening if we needed to.
Yeah, especially with less trodden paths, like making workers on the integral part of our architecture, it was invaluable.
Yes, absolutely. So now we have this optimized server render. What do we win? What is the real world impact? Well, here we go. We've pushed that red nothing render time right back. We've cut almost 2 seconds of white screen on 3G, 3 seconds on 2G. This is a massive improvement to the perception of performance.
Yeah, so the yellow area represents time that we've rendered, but app isn't yet interactive because the JS hasn't loaded. But at least the user is seeing some progress on the screen. It's not the white page. So what's next? Looking at the network waterfall, the thin block at the start of the connection setup is the setup, and the thick block is everything between the request starting to the final byte of the responsive being received.
Yes, and there's another feature that we can look at here that's a feature that's also in a web page test and also Chrome DevTools. We can look at the time to first byte, and this is how it tends to represent it. This is the time taken up by the request and waiting for the server to start sending the response.
Yeah, as you can see, there's a pretty big gap between the receiving the HTML and getting the first byte of those important assets. It's about 400 milliseconds on 3G and a second on 2G.
Yeah, there are 2 solutions to this. Number 1 is HTTP2 server push.
No. H2 push is incredibly hard to get right. We've seen teams of a good number of experts try to use it, and they barely break even on the performance side.
OK, so that leaves the alternative, which is inlining. We take these assets and we put them straight into our HTML.
Yep. So first up, our fonts. So inlining both our fonts would add at least 20 kilobyte. Remember, each bold and the normal is 10 kilobyte each to our HTML, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah, so I took a look inside these fonts, and I found some interesting stuff here, I think. 3 quarters, upside down question mark, surprised face. Once again, don't know what that is. This is for cases where you need a P and a B at the same time. We've all been there. And this one, this is like, I don't know, it looks like a sort of elephant that's sitting, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah? It's fine. So the point is, none of these characters are in this set, the set of characters that we are using on this opening screen, right? All of the characters. So we figured we'd just inline that. It's kind of like a tree staking for the code. In the font, people call it subsetting. There are command line tools for this, but most of those font tools use Python, and I don't really like Python.
What's wrong with Python?
That's fine, it's fine. I don't really like them. There's a little known feature in Google Fonts. The URL for the font CSS can include a text param.
I like Python.
Yeah, no, Google Fonts can do this. Like, you don't need Python.
Okay.
If you include the text plum, the fonts in the style sheet will be subsetted. Just include those character Jake for those subsetted characters. So we use that to subset our fonts, and then went into the style sheet to download the result.
Yes, and then we use our build script to open these files and split them into the template as base64 URLs. And this added only 4.5K to the HTML, like much less than the 20K for the full fonts. Now we still load the full fonts. We load them lazily in the background because we need them for future parts of the game, like the main part of the game, the end screen, things like that. But we don't need them for that very first render.
Right. So let's look at how we do this. Here's our creates HTML plugin that we looked at earlier, or at least the part that feeds the data into the template. So for each font, we are passing in the weight and URL, but we are also going to pass in the inline font as a base64 encoded string.
Yeah, and this bit is just using built-in Node APIs, right? But we're also going to pass in the character sets. This is for the Unicode range for each font. If you've dealt with web fonts before, you'll have seen that you can specify this in Unicode range, and that tells the browser what's inside the font and lets it optimize some of the loading that it can do. We use this library from NPM, character set. You can just give it a load of characters, and it will figure out the most optimal Unicode range for that. It's really handy.
Yep. So now that we are passing everything into the template that we need inline the font, but what about JavaScript?
What about JavaScript? So here's where we're getting the file name for the main JavaScript that we're passing into our template, but rollup will also give us the code. That's part of the bundle object as well, so we can just change that. Job done. There we go. And we're also passing in the file names here for all of the dependencies. That's how we were creating the preload tags before. So instead of this, what we're going to do is go and find the actual code for each of those using a map and get the code for each of those, and there we go. So we actually had to change the template as a result of this, but again, this is using our skills in HTML, like nothing plugin specific. So here's where we're doing the inline fonts. You can see it's part of a base64 URL, the Unicode range there, and here's where we're outputting the inline JavaScript there as well.
Yeah, done. In theory. But how does it impact real-world performance, right? We've already improved things by a lot, but with inlining, we've reduced our interactive time by half a second on 3G and a second on 2G.
But we are not done yet. Now that the JavaScript is inlined as well, we've reached a point where we only have to look at our index.html file, because that contains everything that's needed to get to interactivity. Now, we've come a long way. Even over 2G, we are now interactive in under 6 seconds. Pretty good. But I think we can do better.
Yeah, our index.html is 43 kilobyte right now. Out of that, 32 kilobyte is JS. But that's the code for everything. Right? All the fancy animations, the WebGL, the end screen, but the user doesn't really need anything yet.
Yes, what we've done here is we've done the Photoshop thing. I'm sure you've experienced this before, where you end up staring at this screen for sometimes minutes while it loads 100 plugins, 200 plugins, loads of plugins. And the weird thing about this is the only thing you can do in Photoshop once it loads is open an image or create a new one. You don't need all of these plugins yet.
Yeah, so this is my favorite plugin. Oh, highlighted the bottleneck? I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah, when you showed me this image, I thought you'd just made this up. Like, this is a real plugin?
No, it's literally in the Photoshop. Yeah,
okay,
as a plugin, yeah.
Excellent. I don't know how to pronounce it either. I think it's highlighted bottlenecks, which sounds like a Swedish folk singer, but I don't know what it does.
So let's not load everything before the user needs to use them. Let's prioritize the code. So to do this, right? The first interaction in this code, like this game, is to pick the level of the game you want to play, and that's all. Like, we need to be able to react to that user hitting the start button, but not necessarily starting the game. Like, if user manages to hit the start button before JavaScript downloaded to do the produce the game, then we just show the loading screen. Everything else can load somewhat lazy. It doesn't matter if it's seconds later.
Okay, so we need to code split right at this point. Code splitting in rollup works very similar to how it works in Webpack and Parcel. Like, imports like this will cause whatever.js to become part of the main bundle. If you want it to be code split, you need to turn it into a dynamic import instead. Now, this gives you a promise, so if you want to actually use the module, you will need to await it. This means now that whatever.js, it won't be bundled, it will be put into another chunk.
Yeah, so it makes it async, which can create its own problems. For example, component frameworks expect rendering to be synchronous, right? React Suspense allows to load a component lazily, but Preact, remember we're using Preact, doesn't support the suspense yet. So of course, we wrote a plugin. It's like 20 lines, seriously. It doesn't do half of what React Suspense does, but it does exactly what we need for this project in 20 lines. It wraps a promise of a component and gives us an actual component. You can then use that component to render a placeholder. So provided by the function passed to this loading attribute, sorry. Until the Nebula component loads, we just render the placeholder of a div. But once the Nebula component is ready to use, the other function will be rendered, which gets passed the freshly loaded components.
Yeah, and that was everything we needed. And with that, we've moved all of our components to a lazy model, except the ones that we needed for the first render. And this cut off over 20K of the HTML. The JavaScript is now down to 11K. And I mean, when you think about it, the start of our game is just like a form, really, so 11K is quite a lot, but we were pretty happy with that. We thought that was enough. But how do we ensure that this doesn't creep up over time?
Yeah, so it's surprisingly hard. Like, you write a new component, you do everything right, you load stuff lazily, none of your colleague is looking, and you're having a weak moment, and then you do it, you use VS Code autocomplete. And boom, you have that static import. If the component is used in the critical rendering pass, you might have just added a whole bunch of inline code into this bundle. This is how Microsoft Minesweeper happens, and we want to prevent that.
Yeah, so we tried a couple of ways to do this. We had a comment like this, like, warning, this is part of the main bundle, please, like, don't touch it. Because everyone reads the documentation, right? This was it's a reasonable effort, but, tools, not rules. So we wrote a little thing that we could hook up to Travis CI. And what this does is when it builds something, it logs out all of the files of everything in the build directory. But that means that on the next PR, it can go into the logs of Travis, and it can see what the sizes of the previous build were, and it means it can output the delta. So that means that per PR, we can go and look at this, and we can see that if the index.html file has suddenly grown more than we expect. And if this file is getting suddenly bigger, that suggests that something has gone wrong with the bundling in a way we didn't expect, and we can go and investigate that before shipping it.
Yep, it was quite handy. So, what did we win? What does that gain us, right? Since this was our last optimization, let's start from the top.
Yes, we started 5 seconds until ready on 3G, 11 seconds on 2G. What we did now is we moved the fonts onto our own server and preloaded the fonts and the scripts, and that improved the time to interactive.
Yeah, and then we added a static renderer, improving perceived performance by getting the pixel on screen early.
Yes, and then we inlined the scripts and subsetted the fonts, bringing down the time to interactive again.
Yeah, and then we split the code, right? So we prioritized what we needed for the initial interactivity. And then slashes the time to interactive by over a second on 3G and 2 seconds on 2G.
So from our starting point here, we've halved the time to interactive. Let's actually feel the difference that we've made. So on the left here is our original alpha version without the optimizations, and on the right, our latest version loading over a 2G connection. And off it goes. So we can see this is the initial connection phase, nothing we can do about that. And then bam, on 2G, it's interactive now, the user can use it. Still white screen here, this is useless, no text, and then sometime later, it's finally interactive.
Yeah.
That's what that feels like.
Yeah, so remember, when you're on the festival or train or using conference Wi-Fi like today, or just on vacation, you will be experiencing speed closer to 3G, or even like 2G.
Yes, absolutely. And once they're playing the game, I'm not allowed to ship anything without using a service worker, so I added a service worker. It works offline, and that also means that the second load is instant.
Yep. So where did we end up with our plugin counter, Jake?
Well, let's find out.
Well, to be honest, we wrote way more plugins for this project than what we talked about today. Here are all the plugins that's currently in our rollup config, and I think it's faster to show which one we didn't write. So in total, that brings us to 16 plugins.
Yay. Now, is that a bad thing? I'm not sure. I mean, I prefer wrangling code than I do wrangling config of other people's code. I think it's really empowering to be able to go in and fix stuff without spending days learning a new DSL or anything like that. And I want to make it clear, we're not saying that you should go and use our plugins, because they're kind of dependent to procs, and they're all sort of interdependent as well. What we're saying is, write your own. Sometimes it is a lot quicker to write code to do the thing you want to do rather than take something off the shelf and try and bend it into the shape that you need it.
Yeah, and remember, like, we care about users, right? So if your current build tools are stopping you from making like simple changes like editing HTML to help that users get a better build tools. Right?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you, Jake and Mariko. What's funny about that talk is you don't have to go to the middle of nowhere to experience that connection. We know in this room that in the middle of Bangalore on Airport Road, you can still have a really horrible connection, and you need to use some of those techniques to actually build your web experience. Speaking of bad connections, next up we have Kenji, a Chrome PM, who's coming to talk to us about some of the new APIs, but it's also some of the classic old APIs that will help deliver fast and seamless loading experiences, even on flaky connections. Over to Kenji.
All right. Yes, this is working. So my name is Kenji. I'm a product manager on Chrome. I work on making things load fast. And so this talk is sitting between like the lunch. It was supposed to be a talk that fits in 30 minutes, but I did it once with Yusuke at CDS, and we ran out of time. So I removed a couple of things, and then I was told that I actually have 40 minutes. So against like anyone's good advice, I put a few more things in it, and so I no longer know how long this is going to take. But hopefully you choose this track, and you're going to be on lunch before the other track. We'll see how that goes. So this talk is about new APIs that are coming. They might be behind the flag, they might be an origin trial, or they might be an origin trial soon. So look at this in terms of like what is coming next. And those APIs are designed to create experiences that are seamless, reliable, and instant. All right, on the web, we spend a lot of time waiting for things to load. And especially true if you compare to the kind of user experience you have on native apps. When you browse content on native apps, it tends to be more kind of like instant, seamless. You can't see that things are loading. But on the web, it's like very different, right? You can feel that, oh, this is different, like something is wrong. And there are many reasons for that. And the fact is, in India, it's actually worse on average. Like there is 70% of the time being spent watching at the blank page that you saw in Jake's talk. And so that's not very useful, right? And so the main reason why this is happening, I think, is the way we tend to load websites. So let's take a look. On the web, if you click on the link, this is going to be the typical user experience that you will get to see. The browser is going to fetch the resource for this, like the successive navigation. And while it's doing that, it's going to show this blank page, right? And then you wait. And you are left wondering, is this going to work? Is this going to fail? Like today, you've seen how bad the Wi-Fi can be, right? Like I was trying to make a final like change to my slides and didn't work. And so this is very frustrating. And eventually it's going to start to render, but most of the time this is not the end of it, because there are elements that are coming on the page late, and they're going to push the things that are already rendered. And so if you were to try to use a page, typically you will hit the wrong thing, right? And so that makes for a very frustrating user experience. So can't we do better? What if, for instance, we had the ability to do experience like what's on the screen? An experience where there is no wait time, an experience where there is no transitional state. You can see that everything is proceeding smoothly. You really feel like this is an app, right? It's not a bunch of pages. Okay, so let's take a look at the implementation option you have today at your disposal. You could start by saying, okay, I'm done with the web. I just want to go like native apps, right? And sure, you could do that and deliver a top-notch user experience. But the problem with that approach is that it's kind of like building an experience that only a subset of users need or want. I mean, installing an app is a lot to ask for most of your users, right? whether it's about the time it takes to get to the store and wait for the 30 megabyte of native app to load, that's probably not going to work for everyone. And also, it's more commitment, because in terms of storage, it's more than just like a website, and you also have to agree to permissions out of the gate, and so that's not going to work for everyone. So while you could still consider building a native app for your most loyal users, if you really want to reach new users, you have to you need a presence on the web, right? And so on the web, you have essentially two options. The first one is a multiple page app, or MPA, and the other one is a single page app, SPA. Let's take a look at SPA first. I'm not getting my speaker notes, so this is all by heart. Hopefully it's going to work. So with an SPA, essentially, it kind of looks like building a high-rise. And the reason I say that is because you have to rebuild a ton of features that are provided by the browser, things like history, right? You have to manage your own state. Or scroll restoration. If the user goes back, you have to restore the scrolling position yourself. All of that is provided in the browser, except if you do an SPA, all of that is gone, right? The other thing that this does is that it is creating a lot of dependencies between all the different pieces of the app, because everything is monolithic, right? And so in terms of developer productivity, it's not a great story. For instance, if I want to change something, I'm probably going to impact other teams, because everyone is using the same code base, right? And then the other thing is, when this app grows, an SPA just falls apart. The code begins to become too complex, you have to load too much stuff, and so your solution in that case is to split it into different SPAs. And so you're back to square one, because as soon as you navigate between different SPAs, you have the bad user experience that you saw just at the beginning of the talk. Okay, let's look at what MPA has to offer. So personally, I think going MPA is kind of like building a town, because every team gets its own house, which maximize their productivity because they don't have to reinvent what the browser provide, right? And they can also more freely tweak their product. They can make change to their product without having to worry about what's going to happen for other pages. Okay, but MPAs are not without downsides, right? Overall, an MPA does result in higher friction user experience because everything is a navigation, right? If you want to go from that house to that other house, you have to take the car. Maybe if you don't have a car, you have to call Uber. It's like a navigation, right? It's not going to be a great user experience. And personally, I feel that the best kind of experience that we should aim for is one that is looked like this, like a seamless experience where tap on something, it reacts right out of the way. You have the sense that the app is there to help you get things done, right? This is an example that exists on Android. It's using an API called Share Element Transition. And the idea is that you reuse an element, like in this case, this particular contact, to transition to the user to the next navigation, like providing more details and all of that. And so this is how you make seamless experience. And so would it be nice if we were able to achieve the same kind of experience on the web, especially with an MPA? The good news is that it's still early days, but with the help of the broader community, we think we've found a way to deliver this kind of user experience on the web. It's an early API that we call portals, and we gave a teaser during last year's CDS, and we also showed off our vision for how we want to take this further at I/O this year. And so we've heard a lot of feedback from partners, and they are super excited about this API. And the good news is that the team made a lot of progress. And so we are very close to announce an origin trial for the same origin use case. And so I'm going to walk you through the whole portal API. Okay, before I explain the API, let me briefly explain the key concept behind portals. So portal is all about enabling better navigation on the web. In the early days, all the navigation were done through simple links, right? The problem with simple links is that they're not inherently appealing, and the friction of navigating to a page is always going to get in the way, right? It's not a great user experience. Then snippets became a around, right? Like you see that a lot on like search page and all of that. It's still a link. It's like more appealing because it does have like a nice visual, it provides more details, but overall this is not a much better user experience. Like first of all, the information could be out of date, and it's still going to be a high friction of like a navigation, right? Then after that, what we link, and so the friction of navigation is still there, right? It doesn't really change the user experience itself. Okay. And this is where portals come in. It's kind of like an iframe, except that you can navigate into it. It might be hard to imagine, but maybe this is like a better visual for it. Think of it of like, it's like a frame that you can open and cross over. All right, I think that's enough metaphor for now. Let's take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. So for portals, for same origin use case, is soon going to be available as an Azure trial, so you will be able to play with it in a couple of months, hopefully. And just like any other HTML element, you can use it directly with the portal tag, or you can also like use JavaScript to insert a portal in your document. And I'm going to show you how you can use this and what you can create with it. So let's say you have a page like foo.html, all blue, like super nice with blue background. Clearly, this was designed by a cat, right? I'm not a designer. But that's going to be enough for us to explain the basics of portals. And then you have another page, probably designed by the same cat, bar.html, pretty similar to foo, but with different color, and so on. So we'll use those two pages to show what you can do with portal. First, before you do anything, you should check that the portal API is supported, because by now, like given this presentation, you should know that the internet is powered by cats, and you don't want to mess up with cats, right? So you don't want to create a user experience that only works in like a specific browser. You want to be nice and offer a user experience that works everywhere. And so you can check if portal is available by checking this portal element in the window object. So do that first to understand whether or not you can use it, and if you can't, just rely on the current user experience that you have today. Next, let's create a portal element by calling this API, document.createElement. And then we can set the document that we want to use for the portal, in this case, the bar.html, the yellow page. You can also add some style to it. And then finally, you can append it to the main page, in this case, foo.html. And so there you go, you have bar.html embedded in the main page. You can also check in DevTool that this is actually another document that is being embedded. It's not just like a visual or like a canvas, whatever. It's the actual document is there. Yeah. You can style the element as you want. Like in this case, I just made a preview of it. Like it's a smaller version of the document. I'm using position fixed, and so on. And so none of that is super exciting. I mean, like you can embed document within documents. That's kind of like not new. And this is where portals actually shine. With this API that's specific to portal, you can do very fancy things. So this API is called Activate. And essentially, it's a function that lets you navigate into the page that was already rendered, right? And this is how you can create instant navigation. Let's see how that works. So what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to add a click event listener so that when the user touch the bar.html element, I can call the activate function. Okay, and when I do that, you can see that the top-level window navigation happen, and you magically navigate into bar.html instantly, right? Without any white loading screen whatsoever. This is an MPA, right? With an SPA, you could do that very easily, but with an MPA, you can't do that today. It's not possible. And if you pay very close attention, you can see that the URL is actually changing, right? Those are two different pages, right? And this is super important because you don't have to reinvent all of that navigation and like state management. So as you can see, portal already makes loading disappear. You don't need to wait for the page to render anymore because it's already rendered in the portal. Isn't that great? Like, can I get a round of applause? Like, this is amazing, no? All right, woohoo. So we did make loading disappear, and maybe I could just end my talk right there and we can have lunch. But I mean, like, the target experience that we wanted is quite different, right? If you look at this is going way too fast. It's kind of confusing. It's kind of like one of those movies that like are super hard to follow because they would cut to like a different scene and you lost the plot. Like it's not easy to understand what is going on, especially if you are looking at it and you are not doing the interaction, right? And what I want is something more like this, where there is a sense of like there is a transition happening, like I understand that the app is reacting to what I'm doing, and so like is that it? Like just like Polo, is that it? Is that just like the activate function? The good news is that Polo has nothing to do with animation, right? And I think it's actually a good thing because I don't think an API should be in a business of defining rigid user experience. Like today, like carousel UI are fancy, but maybe in 2 years from now, this will be like old news and people will have found different ways to do things. And so I think it's actually better that we let you design the kind of like transition and API, transition that makes sense for your product and your users. So let's see if we can improve our demo. So we can start by embedding the Polo just like we did to show a preview of the page. And then instead of like activating right away, what if we were, for instance, to bring back the scale to 100%, right? You would have this like zoom in effect. And so it's more intuitive of like, oh, yes, I touched this thing. This is now becoming the new page. And so, by the way, like just notice that here, the animation is still going on. I'm still on foo.html. I need to call the activate method in order to truly navigate to the page that we want to go to. All right, so as I mentioned, like Polos has nothing to do with animation. And so you can always animate the Polo to make the transition smooth. You could use like existing APIs that we have today. It could be keyframes, it could be CSS animation, it could be driven by JavaScript. Like pick whatever you prefer. In this particular case, I'm going to use CSS transition. So you can see that when the user clicks, instead of like calling activate right away, I'm going to do a fancy animation. And so in this particular case, what I'm doing, is essentially I'm slightly translating the page and bringing back the scale to 100% with a transformation that lasts for 400 milliseconds. So not too slow, not too fast, just to give you a sense that this is the page becoming the full view again. Okay, when the CSS transition ends, you will get a transition end event. And so that's very useful because you could, for instance, show a very simple version of the page while it's in the preview. And when it gets activated, then you can go crazy and load all the rest, right? You can like use JavaScript and like make it as easy as you want. And so that's where you would do it. And then eventually, yes, you can call the Polo activate method so that you transition the user to this new page. And so this is how like an instant navigation can be done with Polo. Despite being an MPA. Okay, this looks much better, right? But what if I don't want to force my users to navigate away? Okay, you might be wondering, like, what's the point of that, right? But I swear this is going to be useful, so bear with me. So beside Activate, Polo has another powerful API called Adopt Predecessor. As you can tell from the name, after being activated, you can use this API to retain the page that activated you, right? This is the predecessor page. It's the page you would go back to if you were to press the back navigation button, right? Let's see how you can use this in our demo. So first of all, you can listen to Polo activate event. And so this is where you would check whether bar.html got activated. And the interesting thing here is that this event comes with the Adopt Predecessor function, right? And so you can use that to retain the page that activated you. And you can also append it into the document itself. And so what I've done here is I built something that looks like this, right? There is bar, adopting foo, activating foo, foo adopting bar, bar activating, and then so on and so on and so on, right? So you can create this like interesting loop of things. Right? Like sure, it's kind of like pointless, like it's kind of like funny, like this cat, right? But there are more interesting ways to put that in practice. So let's look at an example that a partner of us built for us. So this example is an exploration from Yahoo in the US. They are using other processor to smooth out the user experience of reading breaking news. So, like as the name implies, when a breaking news happens, you're probably doing something else. And so if there was a link at the top, you might be wondering, I was about to do, like, read my email or something, right? And so you might not want to click on that link because today you're going to be navigated away and you will lose your context. That's not a great user experience. But with portals, you can design an experience that retains the context the user was just like behind it, and let the user quickly go back to whatever they were doing after they're done reading the news. So this is like a more practical use of this API. All right, isn't that neat? Okay, I can sense that people are like trying, like starting to getting it, right? And so I really wish that after this talk, you go play with it. It's available behind the flag. You can already build interesting demos with it. But before you do, I want to make sure that you are aware that there are things to care about when you use it, right? So first of all, as I mentioned, Portal does not come with any animation. And so it means that it's up to you to do great animation. It's up to you to make sure that you maintain a 60 frames per second, and that you make sure that the animation is going to work well on low-end devices. Maybe you want to do something different. And so like typical advice would be some things like sticking to the transition and opacity properties do tend to be hardware accelerated, right? There are things like that they need to be aware of. You can also use will change to make sure that browser knows ahead of time what you are going to animate. And then finally, if you are doing the JavaScript like approach, you should use request animation frame, right? That's the right way to do animation with JavaScript. So just basics, nothing specific to Portal, but still good to remember that this is a thing. All right, next, accessibility. So in time for the origin trial, we want to make sure that we get this right. So there's going to be, like Portal is going to have accessibility features built into it, but because it comes with typically transition animation, you want to make sure that you cater to the needs of people who don't want like too fancy, crazy animation. And so for that, you will use the media query called prefer reduce motion. And in that case, what I've done is I made the transition less in your face, right? It's like a weaker one. And last but not least, like this is a very powerful element, but don't overdo it. Don't like put like polos for everything on your page, right? It's not going to work. And so you could use, for instance, intersection observer to limit the amount of polos you have on the page at once, right? Only have one for the element that is in the view. If it's out of view, just get rid of it. That kind of stuff, right? Yeah. The other thing you should do also, like you should try to get a sense of whether the user is going to click on that link, and you can design UX that makes it more likely. So like if you don't know if the user is going to click on a link, maybe it's not a good idea to put a portal behind it because it's going to be heavy on the device. All right, if there is any lesson to take from this overview of Portal is that Portal is very simple by design. It's not meant to get in your way of them in terms of creativity. And to give you some ideas to explore, I have a few UX patterns and partners they want to show off. So let's take a look. So this one is the one we showed last year at CDS. I think it's still a great one. It's essentially when you know for sure where the user is going to go next. In this particular case, this is a manga viewer. And we work with Hatena to build this demo. And you can see that they render the next chapter in a portal at the end of the current chapter, right? And it is an MPA. And so you can see this is like a very seamless way of getting user to go to the next chapter. No loading time whatsoever. This is very fancy. All right, another explanation for Farfetch, which is an online luxury fashion retail platform based in the UK. So their goal was to use Portal to smooth the transition on their campaign landing page. And they are also using other processor to quickly get you back to where you started. So this is a very fancy user experience as well. All right, second UX pattern, this one is designed to smooth out navigations between a list of items. So typically an e-commerce website where you have like tons of like possible items the user might want to check. What's happening here is that off the screen there is a portal that is rendering a skeleton UI for providing the details page of the product, right? And then when user clicks on an item, we reuse this image so that you can provide something visually appealing right out of the gate. And then you tell the portal, hey, go fetch details for this item. And so this is how you would fill up this, like for instance, product details, information, price, and so on. So this was just a demo, but this is actually being put in practice by our partners. So this one is done by Yahoo Japan PayPay Mall team. You can see that they are using the same pattern, except that they have a different light transition, a zoom in, zoom out, very fancy transition happening here. And this is an MPA, right? But it really looks like an SPA. Let's try to squeeze one more UX pattern. So this one is about providing a more intuitive way of browsing, consuming content. And my colleague Yusuke, who I did the talk with at CDS, called this speed browsing. And like the one we are showing on the slide, as your user reach the end of the article, you can pre-render the next one, and the user can like drag it over the current navigation to complete the navigation, right? So it's a new way of like consuming content. It's very fancy. Instead of like tapping on the link and waiting, you can just do like a very like seamless transition between different products. This is kind of like similar to that. So eBay is also exploring portals, and what they are doing is instead of having you go to a search page and like tons of like product, they have this like very fancy carousel UX. If you want to check more details, you can click on it, and then it would call the activate method for the portal. And so you navigate to the page that has all the details of that product. One more. This one is done by Yahoo Japan News, and they actually built a whole new experience around portals. So that's also something you can do. You can have your legacy product with the current navigation, and you can build a whole new experience with portal. So in this case, this is like a stack of highly visual cards that the user can swipe through. And if you swipe to the left, you can deep dive into the article, right? And all of those things are pages. It's an MPA. And yet there is absolutely no loading to be seen on the screen. So a very fancy user experience. And the best part is that you can actually go to this link here, turn on a flag on Chrome Canary, and see it for yourself. And if you go view source, you can probably like find out how they actually did it. So that's pretty neat. All right, there is a lot more example I could show, but we'll be probably running over time, even if I have 40 minutes. So I would like to thank all our partners for the feedback we got so far, all the amazing demo that they built. So thanks to them. All right, so have you seen Portal really like allows you to build a very compelling user experience? But is it really enough? Like, should I just end my talk right there? The answer is that while it's true that like Portal can help you build like great user experience, there is no guarantee that users are going to find it, right? Especially if most of the users already have like build preference in terms of how they want to use their device. It takes a lot of effort to discover new things and try new things. So what can you do in that case? Essentially two things. The first one is that you should try to lower the amount of efforts it takes for someone to try something new. And the second one is lower the amount of effort it actually takes for trying to something new, but ideally to zero, right? You should make it very like low friction for people to try something new. And so I'm going to show you a bunch of like products that we have going on to help on that front. First, let's start with a way to make the first navigation instant. Like for instance, what if by the time you got on the bus or the train for your commute, you already had like readily available content on your device? Wouldn't that be amazing? Especially here, like the network can be flaky, sometimes it's slow. That's pretty interesting, right? I see some smile in the audience, so maybe I probably hit a common pain point. And so there is an API that we call periodic background sync that is designed to enable that sort of use case. So with that, not only the experience will be instant, but it will also be reliable because it's on the device, right? If you don't even have a connection, it's already on the device, so you can just enjoy your content without having to worry about it. And some of you may wonder, okay, well, why loading things in advance is important? And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that a fast mobile connection is not always guaranteed. Even in markets like France or the US or Japan, you can see that 4G is not always 4G. Right? There are still a lot of people on 3G, or maybe they actually have 4G, but it's slow. So this is not like something that is like going to happen anytime soon. And in India, you can see that less than half of the 4G connection is actually 4G. It's more kind of 3G. And there are a few reasons for that. I think it's pretty interesting to see how like the price of data coming down drove usage. And you can see that if you're like me and you wake up at 4 a.m., then you're going to have a great time, right? The speed is amazing. But after that, it just goes down and down and down. So like throughout the day, the speed you will get is going to get worse. And so this is showing 4G in India in a couple of like big cities, right? The other thing is, like, beside fetching things in advance because the network is not always reliable, you can think of it as an opportunity to re-engage the users. Either it's like to provide fallback content if the fallback they want doesn't load, and there are a few more things I want to talk about later. All right, so periodic background sync. Let's see how this can be used. So this example is an exploration done by Ghana, by Times Internet. I'm sure you all know what Ghana is. And this is very fascinating, right? Because PBS is a clear like API that makes sense for a product like Ghana, because you don't want to buffer while you're listening to music if the connection goes down, right? So you can prefetch ahead of time new content, or like the content that you know the user is going to listen to during the day, and provide a great user experience this way. Another example from Japan, this time also by Hatena. For them, they want to use periodic background sync to proactively prefetch the new magazine or the new edition of a magazine or a manga, because those can be very large, like it's 100 megs at time. And the thing to know about Japan is that more than 50% of the user only has 3 gigabytes of data per month. After that, they get throttled to 2G speed, right? Think about it. I don't know about you, but on my phone, if I check the whole data usage, including Wi-Fi, I have 70 gigabytes of data per month, right? So just relying on mobile data is not going to cut it. And so you can use PBS to shift, like fetching all of that heavy data when the user is at home on Wi-Fi, so that when they get on their commute, the experience is going to be amazing, right? And until the end of the month. All right, let's take a look at the API. So with PBS, you will be able to register a sync event for your service worker. You can specify your own tag name, just like background sync. And in this case, I'm registering an event called Sync Amazing Cats. You can put whatever name you want, so you can have multiple of them. There is also a mean interval option. So this will be the mean interval between the different sync, right? If you don't want to update more than every day, this is how you would do it. And once the event is registered, the browser will regularly fire a periodic sync event to the service worker. And this is where you could run your own logic to fetch the content and put it in the cache storage, or maybe it's updating application settings, application code as well. So you can do whatever you want there. It doesn't have to be about content. It can be anything. All right. And the way it works is that Chrome is not going to fire the periodic sync event for everything, because that will not scale. It's going to look at how engaged your users are with your app, right? And it will decide the frequency at which this event is going to fire based on that. The other thing that we do today, and it's open to feedback, this API is only available for installed PWA at this moment. All right. Okay, so when websites can proactively make new content really available ahead of time, it results in instant, reliable, and great user experience. What's not to like about this? Well, the problem is that if you do all of that work, but no one notices, it's kind of pointless and actually wasteful, right? But to me, it feels like a discovery opportunity. So we understand that creating all of those great user experience is hard, and so we've been thinking of ways to try to reward that effort. In particular, we think we can help you find new users or re-engage with your existing users. In this particular case, what you're looking at right there are exploration of UX that we have in Chrome. So this is the new tab page. And you can see that we are going to tell you that you have content available even if you are offline. So we are going to start with offline, but you can imagine that as more content is available on the device, we want to make that available for any situation. It doesn't really matter if it's offline or not. And so if you go there, you would see there is a new UX that is going to coming soon, Explore Offline, with content that is available on the device. And so the way it works is that you will need to tell us what's available, right? We can't just guess. And so there is an API called Content Indexing API that is designed to help to make that a thing. So again, to use this API, you need to have a service worker. And at least a subset of your pages need to work offline. And so what you can do here, so you can add URL by using this registration.index.add. You can add URL elements that are available on the device. So first of all, you will need a unique ID so that you can design, you can specify which part of the content is available. Then you have to specify what is the URL to launch this piece of content so that when the user taps on the tile, it gets directed to the right page. This also has to work offline, obviously. Then you can put some additional data, like what is the title, what is the description, icons, images, and also some category. Is that like a music? Is it a video? Is it like a page? And so on and so on. All right. And obviously, in addition to adding, you can also like list what's available and delete everything, or like specific entries, so that you can manage what's available on the device, so that what we show to user is current and up to date. Okay, so having a collection of content ready to go is quite convenient, right? Especially in markets like here, where the condition is not always great. But I think we can take this a notch further. So what if, for instance, we could have a self-contained piece of content, or even an app that you could share with your friend or distribute it in different ways, instead of like just link, right? If I give you a link and your connection is bad, it's not going to be useful, right? But if I were able to share with you an app or a piece of content, you could make that, you could use that right away, right? And so we've been working on something that is going to help here. And so for a self-contained piece of content or like app to exist, there needs to be a way for you to package all the resources it needs, right, in a convenient format that you can distribute. So with the help of the community, we've been working on this thing that for a long time we've been calling it bundle HTTP exchange. It's not very like marketing like savvy in terms of like naming. And so we decided to rename it in Web Bundle, which hopefully is easier to understand what this is about. So as the name implies, it is designed for the web and allows you to bundle resources, so like font, JavaScript, HTML, images. You can package all that up in one file, and you can serve that over HTTP, peer-to-peer, on a USB storage. It's just a file, right? It's kind of like a zip for the web, if you think so. All right, so we have a bunch of things available today. We have a command line interface that you can install to generate package. The best way to try it is to just grab a RAR file from DevTools and use that as the input to that tool. It's going to produce a web bundle that you can use today on Canary if you enable that flag. We are also exploring a JavaScript implementation of web bundle, and we just read the very first draft of an NPM module for that called WBN. Okay, we are still in the middle of like brushing up the library, so if you have feedback on like, is it easy to use, or there anything missing, please don't hesitate. All right, as I said, the distribution format enables interesting use case. In this example, I can share procs.app, right? We've talked about it. It's available in a web bundle format in this case. I can share it with a friend through like a file transfer app, maybe share it or other options. Even if I'm on a plane, like it doesn't really matter. I can share with you and you will get it for sure. The other thing that's exciting is that because everything is on the device, the loading experience is going to be much faster by design, right? So let's do a very like simple comparison. On the left, you have web bundle and the regular web on the right. So boom, there you go. I'm launching the web bundle. It's already done. The web this is on 3G. It's taking its time. It's not done yet. And then finally it's done, right? So like clearly this is amazing. It just works extremely well. All right, so on this clear victory of like upcoming innovation, I want to wrap up this talk and like let you go to the lunch. And so today we've talked about 4 APIs. The first one, portals, is designed to enable instant and seamless navigation. It's going to be available soon in an origin trial for the same origin use case. And hopefully next year we can talk about cross-origin use case. We've seen tremendous support from web developers. And your interest, like building those exploration, like telling us, did we get it right? That's going to be very useful for us to reach back to other browser vendors to make the case that this is useful and that it's going to deliver great user experience on the web. So please play with it. Periodic background sync. So this one is to make content readily available on the device. It's already available as an origin trial. We've seen, as you've seen, like we have a couple of demos already. We've seen interest from web developers. And again, like we need your feedback to help us engage with other browser vendors to make the case for it. Content indexing, this is to make it clear that there is interesting things available on the device to our users. This is going to be available soon in origin trial, hopefully Chrome 80. This is very brand new, so we want to hear from you. Did we get the API right? Do you have any concerns about it? And so on and so on. And then finally, Web Bundle. So this is very bleeding edge. This is not yet available as an origin trial, but this is a convenient distribution format for content and apps, opening new ways to distribute your app and content. It could be sharing between friends. Maybe you can incentivize that. It could be discovering your app at an off-site event. You scan a QR code and boom, you get it. So we are looking for a lot of use case, a lot of feedback, because this is a lot of work. This is not an easy API. So please play with it. Tell us how you feel about the use case, what sort of things we should add to it. So we've seen a lot of interest from developers around specific use case, but I think there is a lot more we could do with it. The sad news is that there is some concerns, but not for the use case I talked about today. It's a different set of use case. If you want to learn more, come talk to me. But for the set of use case I talked about today, it's not that bad. Edge, on the other hand, is totally on board. They understand what this is, why this is great for the web to have. And so hopefully we can convince the other browser vendors that this should be a thing as well. All right, and with that, I'm done. I actually fit the whole talk in 40 minutes. So if you want to learn more, go to this link. There is links to all explainers, hands-on article, more details. And also come talk to me after the break at the office hours and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. Thank you, all of you, for your patience. We realize we've gone 15 minutes over your time. over time. Great. Next up, we have an amazing talk, but before I dive into PJ's talk, some more housekeeping announcements. Please look at your badge and see whether you have an office hour that's been marked out, a particular slot. You may have signed up to speak to the Chrome folks or ML folks or the Android team. It will be on your badge, and if you have a slot, then step out, finish the conversation, and then come back for the talk. And then at 4 o'clock, this wall will go down again, and the stage will become one, and we'll have the plenary talks from 4 p.m. onwards. The second thing that I was meant to tell you about were the feedback forms. So when you signed up, you were given feedback forms, and if you fill those up and give it back to the Google Teams, you will get a goodie bag. So don't forget to do that. Okay, so up next we have PJ, our PM, who works on PWA and TWA, to tell you a little more about engaging your users more deeply on the web. And he's going to tell you about how and where and why to install and use Add to Home Screen, but also a little more about TWA that was launched recently. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. I'm going to try and make this a little bit interactive. The after lunch slot is always, a little sleepier than some of the ones earlier in the day, and we've all been inside all this time, and maybe just like every now and then squinting outside and catching a little bit of sunlight. So maybe just to start with, how was lunch? Thumbs up, was it all right? Yeah, we got a few thumbs up. How about the talks earlier this morning? Did everyone here? Yeah, thumbs up. Everyone's learning something new today. That's good. And one more question. How many of you think that you learned something today that will positively impact your business over the next year? There's some thumbs. I hope by the end of this talk that there will be not just like every hand in the room going up, but hopefully both hands together. I'm missing something that's quite critical, actually, which is my clicker. And we're not going to get very far in this talk without that. So I'm going to go hunt that down. There we go. We'll make a lot more progress now that we've got this. So let's talk about making the web a little bit more app-like. And I think the first question to ask is, what exactly is different about the web from apps? And for starters, apps are installed. And users know that the word install means that it's meant for their device. They wouldn't encounter an install button like this one somewhere where the thing that they're looking at isn't actually designed and meant for the device that they're on. So my goal is to enable web developers to have everything they need in order to do this. There will always be trade-offs to consider when you're thinking about what stack that you want to use to build a project. So my goal is that when developers are choosing to build with the web stack, that you can accomplish any goal that you could with any other technology, including the integration into the device. And this is what you see right here on the right. It's an example of an app that launches from the home screen and is indistinguishable from a native app. Bookmarks in the past were the universal install button, and they've been available on every major device since the dawn of the web. So it's a good question to ask, what do we actually get out of install? What's better about it than just adding a bookmark? And the main reason that we need something that's more than bookmarks is that we need to integrate into the OS in ways that are pretty important to the functionality that we're offering. So for example, a lot of apps use Android's native share sheet. So this is what you see here on the right side, where a URL is shared from Mintra into the Twitter app. Well, in order to enable that share target, we need to integrate into the operating system in a way that's a first-class operating system level entity. And this is something that you can do with an APK on Android, and it's more than what you get from a bookmark. A lot of you might be familiar with this word add to home screen, which is what you're seeing there on the right in the Starbucks screenshot. Unfortunately, add to home screen has actually come to mean two different things, and they're used synonymously in Chrome right now. So add to home screen could actually mean a bookmark, or it could mean that you're installing and integrating into the operating system. So In this talk, I'm going to be using the word install to talk about these integrated experiences and to differentiate them from bookmarks. And in the future, we're going to be making this change to the UI so that whenever we refer to install, that means that something's actually getting integrated into the OS as a first-class citizen of the operating system. So let's talk about a little bit more about install as a user experience affordance. So install is an affordance that's familiar to mobile users who are used to adding content from OS stores that includes places like Play, and finding that content again in a device launching Surface. So this is things like the home screen, for example. Install is aligning to a user's mental model of how apps are supposed to work. And an installed web app, ideally, should look and behave like any other app that the user is using. They shouldn't really have to care whether or not the developer chose to use the web to build that particular app. It should just work the way they expect it to. Most importantly, coming back to what I'd said earlier, install is that signal to the user that this is an experience that should be great on their device. Here's a summary of all of the ways that install is different from bookmarks. So install should be integrating into native launch surfaces. It should be integrating into the native task switcher. So in some cases, the task switcher can be a more natural affordance for users in changing screens than, for example, tabs in the browser. And installed web apps are usually standalone, and those are actually fully separated from the browser and offering access to that task switcher and that launch from native surfaces. We already talked about the integration into native settings and permissions. With an install app, you are telling a user that this experience, it should be like any other experience that they're getting on that device. And that's a pretty high bar to jump in terms of what it means for design of your web app. So fortunately, there's a pattern for building experiences that do exactly this. Progressive web apps are a pattern for building great apps that are using web technology. They have all of the features and the functionality that users are expecting from a modern application, and that includes things like personalized content, an offline mode, push notifications, and instant loading. PWAs and installed web apps go hand in hand. You basically need a PWA in order to unlock and install. Now, there are other types of projects that are trying to crack this problem of how do we use the web stack to build installed native apps. So you can take a look at things like React Native, Electron, and Cordova. These are all ways that you can build native app using web technologies. But these experiences all also depend on functionality that won't work in the browser. PWAs are built directly on the web, and that means you can have exactly one code base for your visitors that are arriving in the browser and your users that have installed and are launching from the home screen. I'd prefer to have 2 or more code bases to maintain doing exactly the same thing with unique bugs and different development skills that a higher force said basically no business ever. The device landscape for this is not getting any easier. And so if you are choosing a non-web route, you generally are going to have to choose a lot more even than 2 different code bases. You might have 3 or you might have 4. There's more screens, there's more configurations than ever before. You're going between screens that are 2 inches big to 200 inches big. But fortunately, the web is really awesome at doing fluid layouts. In this example, the Santa Tracker, which was built by Chrome's awesome DevRel team, works on basically everything with a browser, even this kind of magical screen, which keeps changing layouts and orientation. We find that users who have installed it to their home screen on any one of these platforms are the most engaged, and they come back the most often. So on Android alone, we found that more than 10% of loads were coming from the installed icon. This is fundamentally because when an app is installed, users feel like that experience was designed for them. They'll have better engagement, more loyalty, and a more positive experience. It's quite reasonable to try to understand what is this segment, what are the characteristics of the audience who will benefit from actually installing your experience. First, I think it's really important to understand that it's natural that this is not everyone. Not everyone who visits your website is going to convert into an installed user, and that's fine. Part of the power of the web is that it is ephemeral. That's what makes it such an amazing discovery surface. It's great. You get all this organic traffic that comes as a result of SEO, and part of the design of the web is that users can move quickly between experiences, and let's say that it's an experience that they only need once or they only need once a year. The browser is probably how they're going to want to consume that, and there's probably nothing that you can do that will capture that user to install. But there's also such a thing as an install funnel, and this is similar to native app install or e-commerce conversion funnels, where you want to essentially build a relationship with that user. And most funnel optimization strategies can apply here too. You don't want to push the user to convert to an installed user when they don't really know what the value they're going to get from your services yet. So you should focus on promoting installed users who are frequent users and beneficiaries of your services. Focus on the features that the users are going to care about, as well as the key characteristics of the web installed experience that would differentiate it. Things like small download size, or easier access for the user, or access to key features such as web share. You're going to want to track the right events in your analytics so that you know how to optimize this funnel. And I'm going to cover this in a bit more detail later in the talk. Make sure that you promote web install on screens where the use case is actually going to make sense. So take, for example, this example from Spotify, where the call to action is on a landing page. We're going to be covering more examples of this as we go through the talk. We've covered a bit of the what and some of the why, and I'm going to continue more with the how of install. The basic requirements for supporting on the installable web are to have a web app manifest and a service worker. These are well documented and are the same requirements to be classified as a progressive web app, and that's no coincidence. In this talk, I'm going to be mostly covering the manifest. For the service worker, the requirement is that for install is that the experience works offline, so that if the user opens the app from the home screen, for example, they're going to have some kind of experience that's sitting there waiting. And at a minimum, even if there's no functionality that you can offer the user when they're not connected to the internet, at least you could show them a branded screen indicating that they're offline and that they need to connect. There's a lot of great content out there for how to build your service worker. So what I suggest is if you need to learn more, you might want to check out Workbox, which makes service worker a lot easier. Just go out and do a search on that. Let's focus on the manifest file for a second here. The manifest file is a simple JSON which informs your site how to act when the user installs it. And you need one of these for each of your apps, and you need to include a link to it from every page of your site so that the user can tap install from anywhere. So if you don't just put this on your home page, if you don't have the appropriate link tag in every page of your experience, then those pages will not be, they will not install your app if the user wants to install. Pretty much all browsers have some level of support for this. And this right here, the link rel manifest line, is how you specify the pointer to your manifest. One of the fundamentals of a PWA is controlling what your launcher icon is actually going to look like and what start page it's going to open when the user taps on it. So you're not forced to use just the root of your web app. You can point to any custom page that you want. So it could be the case that where the browser would land if they just typed in your domain name in their URL bar, you might want that to be different than the first page of your web app. And you can do that by specifying the start page in your manifest. Here's an example of the Santa tracker. It has a little green icon and a short name, Santa. And you're going to expect to see something similar when this is installed as an app on desktop, for example. The manifest is controlling how the app is loaded. So for games, you probably want to specify that you want it full screen. So that's, for example, the example on the right. For anything app-like, standalone mode is probably the right mode that you're looking for. Websites running in any mode can still use the browser APIs to request full screen at a later point. So let's take, for example, you don't want to start full screen, but at some moment in your experience it makes sense to open up. Like, for example, you have a mini game in there and you want to go full screen once the mini game starts. You could always request it later on. The manifest file itself is pretty straightforward. Here it is for completeness. It's small, extensible. I'm not going to go into every one of these fields in the talk. There's lots of information about this out on the web, but I do want to cover a few important patterns here. You need to include a few icons in the manifest, and at this point, with the increasing DPI of phone screens, we recommend that one of those icons be at least 512 by 512. Remember, this is different than your site's favicon. You still need that. There's no internationalization built into the manifest file, so you want to specify a different manifest for every language that you're going to support. PWA standard now allows for maskable icons, and the really short version of this is if you provide an icon and indicate that it's maskable, this lets the operating system know that it can close off parts of the icon, and then it can display all kinds of different interesting icon shapes, things like circles, squircles, teardrops, and this is going to make your users feel like that app was actually made for their device. With maskable icons, I actually recommend that you don't use transparency in the icon at all, because this is what the operating system is going to do. A lot of this is quite new, so when you do use maskable icons, you might want to whip out a few different test devices and just make sure that it's masking the way that you would expect across different OS versions. And of course, reach out to us, file a bug if you notice any problems. There's a few things, more things that are coming up with the manifest that are worth mentioning here. One of those is that app shortcuts have been added to the spec. And this lets installed apps basically offer secondary intents. So you can long press on the icon, for example. Native Android apps have had this for a little while. And the example here is actually showing a secondary intent for the Chrome native app. So this is coming soon. Manifests are now supported by all modern browsers, and that leads us to getting into some of the details, which are pretty much always a web developer's best friend. Let's start with Android. So this is the first place that install was actually ever made available, and once installed, apps are first-class citizens of the Android environment, and they're being provided by real native APKs. Chrome on Android is actually able to prompt users to install if your site has both a service worker and a manifest and passes an engagement threshold. The Santa tracker here is pretty ambitious. If you're looking at this animation here, you'll notice that the Add Santa to Home screen mini info bar pops up even while the application is still loading. And this is not very ideal, so I'm going to get a little bit later in the talk to how we change this behavior. Once you, for example, tap the mini info bar, you're going to get a full screen prompt to install. And there's a few things to dissect here. First, as I mentioned, that add to home screen, we're moving away from that verbiage. We're moving towards install. So there can be ways that you could trigger this such that it would only be a bookmark. We want to differentiate that case. So if this is going to be integrated into the user's device, these words are going to change. Over the next couple of months, you'll see them switch to using the word install. As I mentioned, this does generate a real APK that works with any launcher. So it's now integrated into the operating system as some kind of container that's appropriate to the OS that it's been installed in. Another option for install on Android is something called a trusted web activity, or a TWA. I know that the acronym PWA and TWA are close together. It's unfortunate, but they're actually quite different things. A TWA is fundamentally an Android application which features a core activity that's being powered by Chrome. And soon, we expect that both Firefox and Samsung Internet will also provide support for trusted web activities if the user's preferred browser isn't Chrome. Once you've created an app using a trusted web activity, which opens your progressive web app, you could upload that to the Play Store. So then, at that point, it's basically promotable, discoverable, in play, just like any other native app. The best way to learn how to implement a TWA is to look for Google's Code Lab on this. So just do a search for TWA Code Lab, and you'll find more information. There's also, for enterprises, a really interesting option around using Managed Play with G Suite. So that means if your organization signs in to Gmail on their devices, you can push a real APK that's going to load. We do have some, who knows, video problems. Oh, well. I will post these to my Twitter feed afterwards, and you can check them out. There's quite a few steps in the video, just to warn you, but if you watch closely, essentially, what we've built is the ability to push apps out into your enterprise environments, just as if they were native apps. From the perspective of the user who are getting these apps, they're not different from any other native app that you might push out through Managed Play. So let's talk for a moment about iOS. iOS has had installable web apps for some time, but in the last few releases, they have made access to these a lot more practical. So again, I'll push this example out a little bit later after this talk, but I think the important thing to note here is that you do still need to specify this Apple Touch icon. This is one key difference between iOS. It doesn't respect the icons that you specify in the manifest. So there is a separate meta tag that you need to include when you're creating a PWA that you expect to need to work on iOS. So last but not least, I want to talk about desktop. Only Chrome provides install on desktop right now, but I do expect that we'll see support for this from other browsers soon. And I've already seen some exciting moves in this direction with some brands deciding to deprecate out-of-date Windows native apps, for example, with a desktop PWA. And they're working great across all platforms from Chrome, Mac OS, Windows, Linux, Chrome OS. Sites will get this little plus button up there in the top right corner. And users, once they've engaged with that, get a native app that lives in the launcher that's appropriate to the operating system that it's installed in. The plus button even gives you a little bit of a wiggle if you've done the right thing and call attention for the user to the fact that install is available. I'm going to cover some of the frequently missed details that will help you acquire installed app users. So a lot of companies that I've spoken with have expressed concern that they don't want to promote a web install to their users who might already have a native app that they've created. So you do want to promote your PWA, but you don't want to have any channel conflict with your native app users. Now keep in mind that there's actually all kinds of reasons why a user might have either decided not to get your native app, or they might have uninstalled your native app, but they might still want your web app. So storage is the #1 reason that users remove apps from their device. Most web apps are under a megabyte. So these are very tiny by way of comparison. And that does two things. It both increases the chance that the user is going to want to install your native app, and it decreases the chance that the user will remove your app once they've had they're going through and they're cleaning up their device and trying to free up more space. Most PWA installs today are happening from the mini info bar, and that mini info bar was really only intended to be a temporary shim. So a little bit later in this talk, I'm going to be showing you some of the alternatives to the mini info bar pattern. Let's talk a little bit about some of the details about how we can make that mini info bar disappear, though. This is the line, it just went bold right there, event.prevent default. When you're monitoring for the before install prompt event, which is what tells you that the web app is ready to be installed to the device, calling that prevent default will prevent that mini info bar from appearing. Just keep in mind that if you haven't implemented any other pattern for the user to understand that install is available when you do this, you will literally get 0 installs after you call prevent default here. So make sure that you have provided an alternative way, say in your web UI, for the user to install. So let's assume that you have a UI element that's called install button that you're going to display when the user says that install is available. And this element should be hidden from the user until such time as install is ready. So there you see this install button.hidden equals false. We're making that install element visible. And finally, you're capturing a reference to the install event so that when the user does actually click on that install button, you can call the prompt on that element. And that's exactly what I'm showing here. That's how you can use that saved reference. So let's imagine that you want to wait until the user's completed a key part of the journey before you are even presenting the install UI. That's when you're able to use this saved reference and let the user call the prompt method on here. You want to make sure that you have instrumented your analytics. These are the 3 things that you need to worry about before install prompt. This is when the site has qualified for install. The click event, this will be on some part of your UI. I can't tell you what it's going to be because only you know what the elements are, but you probably want to attach a click handler on there and add that to your analytics. And finally, there's an app installed event that gets fired when the user has successfully installed the app from the browser. You might be asking yourself about iOS, and the great news is that iOS Safari has had support for the essential PWA ingredient service worker for quite a while now. And it's easier than ever to install PWAs on iOS Safari. So this is an example of a promotion that we created for the Santa Tracker app, where the button is actually going to be exactly the same between Android and iOS. The only difference is that on iOS, we're going to pop this up in the web UI to help explain to the user how to use that Add to Home Screen option. I'm just going to cover some of the UX patterns that you should consider to make sure that your PWA feels a little bit more like a native app. So there's an expectation that installed apps do look and feel like they're integrated into the device. And you get that feeling when you use great web apps like Spotify or, say, Google Docs. And when you use those apps, you might even forget that they're actually running on the web. So here's how you can help your users have that level of immersion. First, the focus rings. These are letting your users know where their cursor is, and you should always provide these. It's pretty important for accessibility. That being said, you might want to change these up because the default ring is definitely one of the tells of a web app. So mix it up, and this applies to form elements as well as links. Text selection is also something that you're going to want to do a little bit differently. You want to disable it on UI components. It's a bit weird to have parts of the UI selected when the user, for example, does select all. Personally, I'm not a fan of making UI elements selectable at all, but it's especially pronounced after the user has installed a web app. You definitely don't want this happening. You should set a theme color, and that refers to the window color of your app. So for example, you can see that we've got a title bar here that's dark blue. By default, it's being set by the platform, so you want to make sure that it matches your app. Also, be careful about overscroll, which is also what you're seeing demoed here. You probably just want to disable overscroll altogether, because this is a very web-like pattern. I also want to briefly mention the safe area inset, because this is going to help you out if you need to integrate notches into your designs. So here's a few more things you want to think about with respect to the UX. First, don't allow navigation outside of your own site from an installed app. If you do, users are going to be surprised with a URL bar. You probably, if you want the user to go to an experience that's on a separate website, you actually probably want to specify that that should open in a new window, and then it'll open up in the web browser. Next, think about better behavior for extended actions like select all, undo, redo. So this is going to work out of the box for things like the contents of a form element, but what if, for example, you have the ability to reorder cards in your web interface? You want the user to be able to undo that. So make sure that the undo button works the way the user would expect. And finally, you may want to do something different with the right-click menu on desktop. People expect these context menus to do something that's specific to the app, not provide a set of generic web page options. I've mentioned promoting your web app a few times now, so we're going to go through quite quickly just some examples of how you can promote your web app to the users, some patterns that we've seen that are successful. I've had some of our partners come up to me and say that these have been their most successful app campaigns. So first, the header can be a great place to promote install of your web app. You want to use information architecture techniques here to make sure that it's actually relevant to their users, that this is the most important thing you could be putting here, because this is pretty vital pixels in your experience. So just be careful with this one, but it can be a very powerful experience. Another great pattern we see is the use of the hamburger menu. And the great thing about putting a promotional pattern in the hamburger menu is that the user's already engaged with you. You know that there's someone who's interested in what it is that you have to offer. You just want to make sure that you're not going to clutter up your design with it, and that users are still able to achieve their primary activity without getting confused by your promotional pattern. Landing pages are there to promote your services. So you can go big here, make it as large as you want, but just keep in mind that the user first needs to be convinced about the value of what you do. So that's probably the first thing you want to focus on in the landing page and install secondarily. Feed patterns are quite common both on the web and in native apps. So you could use feed cards to promote the installability of your web app. But Please don't show this promotion too often. That will annoy your users. And if a user does dismiss the card, remember that and don't show the card again. Every app use case is a little bit different, so you'll know what an appropriate moment is in your app, but there's always some key moment in a user journey where the user has given a signal that they're engaged and you're not interrupting them from some other, the key activity that you want them to accomplish. So in this example, we're showing a promotional pattern when a game is over. And you want to choose something that's contextually relevant to encourage the user to install. So, for example, saying that it will be easier for the user to come back and play again is a great way to promote in this particular case. So these are some good general principles for promoting web apps. The first one is please don't be annoying. Your users came to your site to get something done. Make that the top priority of your UI, and if they're not having a good time, if they're not enjoying your experience, they're just going to leave. So there's really no point in hassling them about install. Second, if the user isn't really benefiting, don't promote it. And finally, do use context to help the user understand what it is they're going to get out of installing your web app. So investing in a great PWA and making that PWA installable does have great business benefits. So I'd like to share a case study with you. A little bit of background on Oyo. This is the second largest hotel chain in the world, presence in more than 80 countries and 23,000 hotels. And Oyo has seen installability in the mobile web as a key opportunity to scale their demand channel. Mobile web growth by Oyo was facilitated by 3 important steps. The first was the rollout of a PWA over and above an initial M site, a basic mobile website. Then they rolled out install from Chrome, and finally install from Play via Trusted Web Activity. So to give you a little bit more detail on each of these, at each step here, they were able to see not just a lift in conversion rate, but in pretty much every other key metric that they were interested in, including performance. Once they moved to install from browser, they were doubling what it was that they were seeing already from just from the PWA rollout. And this was their first foray into having an app-like experience. And finally, they launched and Play using a Trusted Web Activity, and the numbers there were very strong. And part of the reason for this is that you're capturing a segment of users who already have a very strong intent to engage with your brand. Chances are that if they found you in Play, they found you by name. They already searched for your keyword and for your name as a keyword, and they are interested in doing business with you. So as you can see, Oyo was able to achieve actually a conversion rate that was quite equivalent to their native app with the Lite offering. And the Lite offering differentiates itself by being smaller, being a much smaller footprint at just 900 kilobytes by comparison to the native app with a very similar rating in the Play Store. Thanks so much for joining today, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, PJ. Okay. Don't forget your feedback forms. Parul's looking at me from the back. Remember to hand them in, you'll get your goodie bag. The next talk, we have Shweta and Saurabh coming on. They're mobile technical consultants, and they're going to tell you about the superpowers of the web. And honestly, I'm not going to reveal any more because I think this is the funniest, most entertaining talk you will hear. Lots of humor thrown in. Saurabh and Shweta.
Where's the Josh? Where's the Josh, I said? How's the Josh? How's the Josh? Oh, it doesn't look high. Thanks for surviving so far and making it to our talk. Today we're going to talk about web as a building block of emerging technologies, right? So I'm Saurabh.
And I'm Sweta.
And we work as mobile solution consultant, which means we work with partners like you to make sure you're making most out of the web for your users and business.
Saurabh, do you know how many connected devices we had in 2017?
2017?
Yeah.
Let's test my GK later. Let's present right now.
Wait, hear me out. We actually had 8 billion connected devices in 2017 itself.
Wow, that means more than 1 device per person already.
Exactly. And by the end of next year, we'll have roughly 3 devices per person.
Given the population is still in control.
That's true.
Let me throw some stats at you as well right now. So what you just said is very relevant for India, because we see 40% new users coming online from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. Now, what these users primarily use is smartphones or very low-end feature smartphones to come to internet. 70% of the phones that they use are actually Android Go.
Yes, exactly. And I'm sure we can all agree that the common platform that all of these users use multiple times a day is the web, right?
Yeah.
So, web is the only platform that can reach all of your users. And as many of you in the audience are from the sub-2K era, I'm sure we can all agree that 20 years ago, the web was the only way that we could access and consume digital content.
Being only one, I think I know how the web would be feeling at that time. Kabhi kabhi lagta hai Punish Bhagwan hai.
And regardless of changing times, the web has always adapted and maintained its reach.
Right, but despite that, I think despite being very flexible and accommodative, I think web is still made to feel like this. मुझसे कोई प्यार नहीं करता माँ. And the reason for that is the number of new platforms coming up every now and then. I think I just ponder sometime, if this keeps happening, what will happen to the future of web?
Well, nothing.
Nothing?
Yeah. Web is like that hero from the typical Ekta Kapoor serial who never dies.
Oh, I thought that superpower was only applicable for the star cast of like Ekta Kapoor.
Well, speaking of superpowers, let's have a look at some of the superpowers that the web has. So today, we want to talk to you about 3 superpowers that the web has, which makes it a building block for emerging technologies.
Yeah, let's start with interoperable. So the definition of interoperable is, if 2 products or programs are interoperable, they can be used together. Simply put, jo bhi lao do lana.
Oh my God, enough of your bad mimicry, Saurabh. Let's take a look at some examples of how the web is actually interoperable.
Yeah.
The first one is stories, which are powered by AMP.
Yeah, most of us have seen the story format across social media. I think they are interesting and very exciting content to consume. But I think they don't scale very well on the open web because they aren't shareable, linkable, or some even vanishes after 24 hours.
Yes, you're right, Saurabh. And AMP Stories actually changes this by being able to be discoverable by search engines. And you can even use stories to link to other parts of the web. So let's say you created a new story, you can actually link it out to another web page, which is your article page. Or if you're a travel site, you can even create an AMP story about, let's say, a trip to Tokyo and link it out to a web page, which is your booking page.
Oh, so that's where it becomes interoperable. But I really want to understand, why do we need another story format?
That's a great question. So the AMP team has been working on developing this format for a long time and interviewing users. And in fact, even a Forrester consulting report found that nearly 2/3 of those whom they surveyed preferred a tappable story format compared to the equivalent scrolling article.
But how many of you think actually it's very difficult to build? I see no hands.
Very optimistic
yeah,
crowd.
you're absolutely right. It's not difficult to build at all. Actually, think of AMP stories as magazines, right? And the pages within magazines as those AMP story pages. And that's what exactly you see from the tags that you have here. What you see in white is the AMP code, a very simple AMP code. And if you have already built site on AMP, you can roll it out like just in minutes.
Wow, that's pretty awesome actually. And so we know that stories are interoperable with the web, but I want to take this one step further. And for that, I need to introduce you to a good friend of mine.
Oh, I thought I'm your good friend.
Yes, you are, Saurabh. But I want to introduce you to another good interoperable friend of mine.
Which is?
And that's the Google Assistant.
Oh.
So the Assistant is a great way to acquire users. Did you know that according to a recent study by We Are Social, they actually found that 5 in 10 Indians use voice search and commands. And that's actually the highest among all of the countries that they surveyed, and they surveyed a lot of countries, right?
Whoa, so that means if you're built for web, you can use it anywhere, like Assistant.
Yes.
That's pretty powerful.
Yes, exactly. And in this example, we can see how the Assistant is interoperable with the web. Let's say I want to watch Mission Mangal, right? And I'm asking the Assistant that I want to watch Mission Mangal. And without even installing anything, the Assistant knows that, hey, Book My Show can actually help me buy my tickets. And the user is actually taken into the web page to complete that transaction and to buy that ticket.
Wow.
That's very interoperable indeed, right?
Right. It took the interoperability to next level, and I think building actions is no more a mission mangal.
And a number of e-commerce companies actually went taking it to the next level. So Walmart, for example, wrote their own dedicated assistant action because they wanted more control over their experience.
Yeah, for example, if I just say, OK, Google, ask Walmart to add apples to my cart, what Walmart app has done, it remembers your shopping history and preferences and selects the type of apples you want and directly adds to the cart, just like this.
Right. And you can even be deep linked straight to the PWA to complete that final step of the transaction.
Yeah, so this is how the checkout page that you built for your web can actually be reused on Assistant. Who said not having transaction of Assistant was a roadblocker for you? So Shweta, should we look at the next superpower?
Yes. Let's talk about embeddable. So embeddable means having the ability to be incorporated into something else.
Well, I don't know who thought about this, but this certainly isn't embeddable. Not everything is embeddable, for sure.
That's true, but the web certainly is. And the first feature in this embeddable series I want to talk to you about is portals. So you can think of portals as the next generation of iframes, which empowers you to make seamless and really fast transition between pages. And I'm sure you heard a lot about it in Kenji's talk earlier. So in this example, Times of India is actually using portals to transition between their recipe pages, right? And you can see that the transition is not only seamless, it's so fast, it's almost instant. And the transition doesn't just have to be within your own domain, it can even be to another domain.
I think one of the interesting things about Portal is that you don't really need to worry about the tech stack that you want to use. Now, what you see here are two examples. On your left, you see a web manga viewer, which was developed by the manga stories in Japan. And what they're using is, they use Portal for smooth transition so that their multi-page app looks like a single-page app. And what you see on the right-hand side is, we have integrated a third-party page into the my main page, and when I focus on that, it changes the URL to that. So basically the point is, you get the complete power of how you want to manage your transitions. The one thing to note though is that you can't use portals within iframes, because as and when it gets focused, it changes the URL. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to web.dev hands-on portals.
That's great. So we saw how the web can be embedded in web, right? But can it be embedded in other platforms?
Oh yes, very much. And one of the examples for that is AMP for email. So what AMP for email does is, it lets you write code that will make the email interactive. Now think of it this way. If you are a hotelier or if you are a restaurant owner and you want the users to actually share the feedback with you or star rating, why would a user go to an email first, click on the link, go to your page, wait for your page to load, and then give you the rating, right? If you would have given that option within the email itself, it would have been so much easier for them. This is what GoIbibo has actually done. So they need the hotelier's feedback very regularly. And that's where they implemented this B2B use case to be done. Now, they got some really cool increase in numbers, and all that is actually published in one of the blog posts available on amp.dev. I highly recommend you to go through that.
Let's also take a look at a code example. So building an AMP for email is actually not that difficult. AMP emails must identify themselves as such by including the AMP for email in the HTML tag. Next, in the header, you need to include the AMP runtime script and a CSS boilerplate which initially hides the AMP content until the AMP runtime is loaded. Now, if you've worked with emails before, adding a script into an email may set off alarm bells in your head. But rest assured, the email providers who actually work on AMP and support it have fierce security measures to make sure only vetted AMP scripts can be run. So you get dynamic and interactive emails with the security as well.
Yep.
And next, we build the body of the email. So in this example, we have a heading and a carousel which the users can actually scroll through in the email itself.
So we saw that writing the code is pretty simple, but one thing that you need to make sure while making use of the AMP for email is that it needs to support the MIME type text/xamp HTML. And the reason for that is, it's only when the email client recognizes this MIME type, it renders the email as dynamic one. So as a developer, you need to make sure that if you're using a third-party service, or that it should support this MIME type, right? If you want to really get your hands dirty, you can try the first link here, and if that convinces you to stay invested, you can learn more using the second link. And for the few of you who are still thinking what exactly AMP is, amp.dev is your friend.
That's really cool. Now, speaking further on embeddability, What if we could put a web application into the Play Store, right? And that is very much possible today with trusted web activities, which PJ just talked about, right? So you can build a web application and put it on the Play Store as a TWA as long as you adhere to the Google Play policies and you have a quality PWA that is both installable and fast.
Yep. There are some partner examples here at the bottom, but let me tell you more about OYO. So OYO Rooms built a very great TWA, which is fast and smooth. It uses very less data, and as well like very less data, less space on the phone. So basically, that's a one step closer to make the experience for even the remotest of the users to make a booking without any problems. And what we see here is somebody from their team actually presenting in Google for India this year, where they talked about how transmitting from like web to a PWA gave them an uplift of 2.2x times. And when they converted that to a TWA, they got a further uplift of 2.6x times.
Wow, that's actually a great way to reach out to users, isn't it? But was it very complicated for them to build?
Not really. So if you look here, you essentially just have to do 4 steps to convert your PWA into a TWA. Of course, you can do more tweaks, but just to get started and roll out your first version, what you can do is just check out this code, import it into Android Studio, make 3 changes into your build.gradle file, which is hostname, the website that you are the owner of, the name of your choice, which is Ola Lite in the previous case, and then the application ID, which is very specific to your Android application that you just rolled out. The last and the most important point is that you need to create the asset link and upload it to your well-known folder, because that's when you are able to build that trust between your website and the app, that this is the website that I own. And tada, you're done.
That's actually not as complicated as I thought, right? Now, email and Play Store are not the only ways that the web is embeddable. Google Pay recently launched the Spot platform on the Google Pay app. Spots allow businesses to create customized and branded experiences within Google Pay itself. So if you are in the business of selling bags and your customers didn't really know about your website or app, they can simply tap on your spot in the Google Pay app and they can access a website-like experiences and they can browse through your products and even make a purchase.
But what does web has to do with like the Spot platform? I thought we were talking about superpowers of web, like being embeddable.
Yes, let me give you an example for that. So a spot is actually built using HTML and JavaScript. So existing investments in the web or a PWA can easily be transformed into a spot with just a few lines of JavaScript. So in this case, Coffee Spot's web experience is in a way embedded in the Google Pay app.
Oh, gotcha.
So we just showed you how the web has been helping other platforms to leverage itself. But what is the web getting in return?
What is web getting in return? Right, that's a good question. Let me think. Okay, let me put an analogy which might resonate with the people here. So, do you agree that if I say that web is like Sunil Shetty from movie Dhadkan?
Oh, not again.
No, hear me out. So, web is like Sunil Shetty from movie Dhadkan. मैं तुम्हें भूल जाऊं, ये हो नहीं सकता. और तुम मुझे भूल जाओ, ये मैं होने नहीं दूंगा.
Okay, that's actually pretty good. I have to give it to you.
That brings us to the third and the last superpower of web, which is transformative. Now, transformative means that causing a major change to something or someone, especially in a way that makes it or them better.
So the first one in this transformative series that we want to talk about is something that probably caught your eye if you saw Sundar's keynote in I/O this year.
Yeah, and I know what you're talking about. Duplex on the web. How many of you got excited with this when you heard it for the first time? Yeah, we see quite a lot number of hands here. So we all know that we all have been trying to solve the problem of making it easier to purchase on the web. But we all know it's so difficult because the experiences are broken and there are too many steps involved. Now what ideally took 18 swipes and 18 taps and 10 swipes could now be done with 3 taps and 0 swipes if you're using duplex on web.
That's right. And one of the examples of that is what you see here, which is an experiment where duplex on the web can actually help to fill out and complete and submit an online form for you. And to get the necessary information, it uses Chrome autofill. So users can actually choose the information that they want to use in this transaction checkout flow.
So not only it reduces the chances of doing the errors by the users, it also increases the retention, because we all know if there are more than 5 steps involved, people will drop off.
That's right. Now, another way in which the web is actually being transformative is in terms of virtual reality. So, Web VR allows you to create immersive web experiences. And AR too, so maybe something like Pokemon Go on the web.
Oh, Pokemon Go, gotta catch them all. So while we thought that it would be very much relevant to put them in the series, we want to tell you about some of the caveats. So these features are still in experimental phase, and they have been in testing ever since. If you need to test them out, you still need to go back to the Chrome Canary version 70, 71, or 72.
That's right. The good thing is that you can still actually learn these technologies because the documentation and code labs are still available. Now, what's the next transformative capability?
But before I go there, let me ask the crowd, how many gamers in the house? Woo! How many gamers in the house? Yeah, quite a lot of you. Cool. So, I think if you're a gamer, you would have heard about the Stadia platform, right? Sorry? It's coming today. That's a very good question. So clap for you, if not for us. Cool, let's move on.
Now, one last thing in this transformative series that we wanted to talk about was WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a web standard that enables you to bring native code to the web. So an application written in like C or C++ can actually be brought to the web, right? And it helps it to run on the web near native speed as well. And there's so many more things that we're doing in this regard, right? So for example, Flutter announced that they're going to work on Flutter for web.
And similarly, there are so many machine learning enthusiasts with a soft corner for web trying out TensorFlow.js. Now with this, let me show you a quick demo where we could actually show offline to online capabilities for product search using ML. Can you show the screen? Can you click on the camera? So these are the real, like these are all you. Like just say hi there to him. Yeah, can you scan a product there? Yeah. Okay, this is a watch. Yeah, click tick. Fingers crossed if it works. Oh,
yeah.
What you wanted was a watch, but what you got is a cheaper option. So they're looking at like cheaper options right now.
Yeah. Not enough watches cost too much, let's just buy this thing.
Cool, I have to admit that failed. Cool, let's go back. Now with this demo, I ideally would have said that as a web developer, you could have said to your non-app developers, this. But it didn't work, so it's like I'm on the receiving end right now. Cool.
But Saurabh, regardless of what you say, if you're building for native, you have a choice. You have a lot of building blocks,
That's right.
But when you're building for the web, your options seem kind of limited.
Right. I know what you're exactly saying, because as a web developer, sometimes I feel that with the limited capabilities that I have in hand, I can only build this much, while I probably wanted to build this. And as a native developer, probably you can achieve that. And that's where, as a web developer, I have to say to them, cheating karta hai tu.
And that's actually where Project Fugu comes in.
Project Fugu? Fugu is a Japanese fish. Are you fishing around? Is Google getting into the fishing business now?
Oh, please. Project Fugu is so much more cooler than that fish. So what it actually is that it enables web applications to do anything that the native apps can by bringing those native capabilities up to the web as well. And we do this while maintaining the user trust, privacy, security, and other core tenets of the web.
And there are tons of such APIs which are available already, and you might have heard about. For example, now web authentication is actually possible. You can actually use web authentication for users to actually swipe and get into your application as logged in. Similarly, there is something called as Web Share API and SMS OTP Retriever, which probably you guys have heard so many times. But just to give you a demo, can we please quickly go to the demo? For the ones who are not, who are having the mobile, you can probably go to this link yourself. It has a list of all the Fugu APIs that are currently available, and you can test it out yourself. Are we doing the demo?
Give us 1 second.
So for the people who are already on this link, you can probably try out SMS Retriever yourself. You can go there, and then it will ask you to send a message. So you don't have to set up a server to send you a message. You can copy that from your another phone and send it. So irrespective of who is sending it, you will be able to clear it.
Yeah. And if you actually go to this URL as well, there's tons of demos on all of the other capabilities from Project Fugu as well.
Right. So, well, in interest of time, let's move on. Well, these are some of the partners who have already built this and rolled it out in production. Now, when I say rolled out in production, they are not using the final production version of SMS Receiver API. They are using the original trial version of it. That means you need to register for it and get a token for you to able to use it in the production. Now, another cool API in this series is Contact Picker API, which probably you guys have already heard of. I want to just focus on one of the use cases which GoIBibo is doing. Now, for example, if I am the logged in user on GoIBibo and I want to make a booking for Shweta, I certainly probably won't remember her phone number or something. So that's where I am using this Contact Picker API on GoIBibo so that I can make a booking on her behalf. And that's around 15% of the transactions which are made on GoIBibo platform currently. With this, they are looking to expand onto the other use cases like Go Cash Plus. I'm sure you might have earned a lot of money using that.
So what you're basically saying is that these used to be the capabilities on web before, and over the past few months, we've actually added so many more capabilities to bridge that gap with native.
You can learn more about these capabilities by visiting this link. I'll give you a second to click a snap. And if you want to track what the status of each of the APIs is, or what are the ones which are planned in future, you can certainly visit this link, which is goo.gle/fugu-API-tracker.
Now, we want your feedback too. So if you've tried any of these APIs and you found some bugs, please do log them at bit.ly/fugu-bugs.
Now that we are coming almost close to our presentation, and we'll spare you guys, but before that, we just want to summarize with the characteristics of web that we could show through what we showed today. The first one being, it puts others first.
It shuns the limelight. Web is not very much talked about.
Yep. It inspires through action, not just words. We keep our promises.
It always keeps improving, like the APIs that you just saw.
It plays through the strength of the teammates being the other platforms.
And it's the first tech Avengers superhero.
Did you just say Avengers?
Yes.
So if we use the analogy of platforms being Avengers, I'm sure that web is the Captain America.
That's actually very true. Speaking of superheroes, we also wanted to take a moment to thank Thomas and Dave because they've worked on similar content and demos which you've actually seen today.
Yeah, we shamelessly reuse a lot of it. And finally, I think we want to thank you, and you have been a lovely audience. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shweta and Saurabh. That was a fascinating talk that hopefully encourages all of you to invest in building.